Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railways, Dorian and then subsequently Kinghorn subdivision. We are on the southern side, or I guess the western side, of the rail crossing here over the Wolf River. So here you can see the bridge in front of us. We are picking up right where we left off on a previous hike. So we are just north of the community of Dorian, which we are going to be working our way towards here in the township of Dorian. And so again, what we're going to do is we're going to work our way from this spot right here, so right from the Wolf River where we concluded a previous hike a couple of weeks ago, and we are going to work our way a couple of miles to the south to Dorian Station and just past there. So we're going to get rolling here. There's a bunch of things to see on the site, on this hike, on this hike. We are going to be crossing another river. So again, that is the Wolf River just behind us. And we have Coldwater Creek coming up in front of us. What did the dog see? So it's a beautiful fall morning. There's a little bit of cloud. It is going to clear up, and hopefully we can keep this cloud around until we get to our destination. So while we have a minute here, we can start our usual history lesson. So this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental line. The Canadian Northern Company got its start. Oops, we forgot a spot here. Let's loop back here a second while I finish my story. I just saw this, so that's why I missed it. So the Canadian Northern Company got its start in Manitoba back in 1896 by acquiring a bunch of charters and things like that. Their first big project was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, and Winnipeg. And that line was built between 1899 and 1902. So what I missed, and again, I just saw this, I just found this, was the flanger sign here for the bridge crossing. So we have been through this section before, so this is another redo. So we were here actually around this time 2 years ago. So I believe it was actually Halloween 2020 we were through here, and it was a much windier day, much colder day. There had been a little snow previous couple weeks before, and so some of the snow had gone away, but there were still patches of snow here and there. Okay, so anyway, so Canadian Northern had built their line between Port Arthur and Winnipeg, which opened in 1902, and afterwards they started building lines all throughout the prairies. Canadian Northern sort of became synonymous with the prairies, particularly the northern part of the prairies, and around the same time they started building north from Toronto, acquiring lines and building some lines and things like that, eventually reaching up into the Sudbury area. Now, it was around this time that Canadian Northern realized that for their company to be profitable long term, they would have to have a transcontinental line. Now the problem is that Canadian Northern did not want to complete that connection through this area. They did not want to build the section between Port Arthur and the end of Steele in the Sudbury area, specifically Ruel. So they looked at a lot of different options in terms of, you know, trying to work around that, including a running rights agreement with Canadian Pacific. Unfortunately, none of that worked out, and so Canadian Northern was forced to build. And so construction again began in 1911 and was concluded on New Year's Day 1914. The last spike was driven, and this line opened for traffic in 1950. Now, unfortunately, right around the time that the line opened for traffic, Canadian Northern started running into some financial difficulties, and those were precipitated by construction costs. So for example, building through the mountains of British Columbia, building this section, and then some of the issues surrounding World War I. So by 1917, 2 years later, the company was basically bankrupt and had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And the next year, in 1918, Canadian Northern was forced to merge, amalgamate, whatever descriptor you want to use, with a bunch of other Canadian government-owned bankrupt lines known as the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger produced Canadian National Railways. And the nationalization process took about 5 years to complete. So in 1923, the Grand Trunk lines were finally brought into the fold. And so in 1923, the name of this line changed. It had previously been the Nipigon subdivision of Canadian Northern Railway, and it became the Dorian subdivision, obviously named after the community of Dorian, which we're heading towards. It continued to be known as the Dorian subdivision until 1960, when there was a major sort of reorganization with CN. They adopted their modern logo, and they realigned, rejiggled a bunch of their lines, including this one. So the Dorian subdivision was merged with the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision, and that merger produced a new, well, not a new line, but a new name called the Kinghorn. And so the Kinghorn ran all the way from Long Lac to Port Arthur, and that continued to operate until 2005, when Canadian National decided to discontinue service. And beginning in 2008, right in this area here, they began lifting the rails, and that process was complete by 2010. So here you can see we're going through a grown in section. Man, I can't talk this morning. You can see all of these alders that are growing up and hanging over the grade. Here you can actually see there's a rail. And again, this was a new discovery that I just saw this morning. So there's a length of rail. I can't identify it. The way that it's tilted, all the sort of identifying marks are kind of, or the ones that I can kind of feel are on this side, and I can't kind of get my head down far enough to kind of have a look at that, just the way the rail's sitting. But it does look like a little bit of more of a modern rail, I might say. I don't know, maybe a 100-pounder that they normally used on this line. Okay, so let's continue through here. Again, through this little grown-in section here. You're gonna see a couple of these along this section here, where it's a little bit more grown in. Starts to open up here. We do have a road crossing coming up. Just gonna keep my eyes open. Signage and stuff is very hit and miss on this section. Again, this was one of the first areas where they lifted the rails, and they did a pretty thorough job of kind of raising a lot of the remnants of the railway. I mean, that flanger sign that we saw back at the bridge is a pretty rare thing. I'm just sort of keeping my eyes open here as we approach this road crossing to see if there's a flanger sign for the crossing here. So the road that we're coming up to is known as Bible Camp Road. It's named after, because on Lake Superior, which is just over there, is the Dorian Bible Camp, which has been in operation for, I think it's still being utilized, but was kind of around for many years. So I'm just looking for this, if there's any trace of a flanger sign. Again, if it's in this brush here, good luck trying to see it. Being this open here, I think it may have been yanked up. So we'll carefully make our way across the road here. Okay, so we do have a little mileage check here. So we do have a junction box for the fiber optic cable, and I don't know, well, you can see that over there. So the mileage is 147.98. That is the mileage on the Kinghorn. So for the original line, so for the Canadian Northern Nipigon subdivision, and then for the Canadian National Dorian subdivision, what we have to do is we have to subtract 49.7 miles, because those lines started in Jellicoe, not Long Lac. So they started in, they had a different starting point. So the mileage is slightly different now. So that means we're basically approaching where milepost 148 should have been. I looked around, did not see the milepost markers. Milepost markers are pretty much impossible to find in this area. Okay, now why milepost 148 is significant. Okay, so milepost 148 translates into milepost 98.3 on the original lines. So at milepost 98.3, from 1927 until 1936, there was a spur here. And kind of looking around to see if I see something. I kind of see something here. I don't know if that's it or if there's something on this side. I have a feeling that because this area is kind of a little bit more developed, a little bit more difficult to sort of see things in this area. So this this spur was known as the Nicholson Spur. I'm guessing that's named after a guy or a company, so maybe the Nicholson Lumber Company or the Nicholson Timber Company. I'm not sure. I'm just looking to see if I can see anything. So it was a 14 car spur, and it was connected at the west end. So the west end, so this end, again, not really seeing anything that would sort of resemble that. See the base of a telegraph pole there. We're going to see lots of telegraph poles on this hike. So I'm guessing just by the lay of the land here, it had to be over here somewhere. But again, everything kind of falls off, so it must have been further up there where that spur was located. Just keeping my eyes out here if we can see maybe a flanger sign here for the bridge that we're approaching. Again, if it's down there somewhere, good luck trying to see it. You can see the growth here is pretty thick. You can see there's a base of a telegraph pole there. I'm not sure where the telegraph pole itself is. So before I forget, I'm going to flash up that timetable that you'll be able to see the Nicholson Spur on there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to hold up here for a second, and then we're going to work our way across the bridge that you can see here in front of us.